Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. So this morning was, I thought, a fascinating set of conversations about the future of Milwaukee County and the future of our community as a whole. And it made me stop and ask a couple existential questions. So the first presenter was sharing a lot about the nature of the technological progress that we're all not just on the cusp of, but fully participating in. And so it's this question of who are we and what are we going to become? That's a question that I'm asking all the time now about our community, especially as we try to figure out how these changes affect every single one of us here in Metro Milwaukee. So with the digital divide, which I'll tell you about shortly, the digital divide is really a question, or addressing the digital divide is really a question about who is going to be a part of our community. Who gets to grow and flourish and advance? Who is going to get opportunity? Who is going to experience the benefits of a lot of the technological tools and skills and changes that, say, someone like myself takes for granted most of the time? And who is going to be, who stands to be left out or potentially left out of a lot of those changes? That's what Techquity is about. Techquity is an initiative that began really during the pandemic, but the set of problems that it addresses really predate the pandemic to the genesis of all of the technologies that we use and enjoy on a day-to-day basis. So that's what I'm excited to tell you about this morning. So real quick, just by show of hands, is the digital divide a phrase that's familiar to you? If it is, please raise your hand. Okay, so most of us. Very broadly speaking, the digital divide is a set of complex, interrelated social, political, economic, technological problems. And what we're doing is trying to figure out the best strategic, efficient ways of solving those problems, because they do have significant consequences for individuals, for families, for our community as a whole. County Executive Crowley was using the phrase social determinants of health quite often. Digital inequities are social determinants of health. Absolutely they are. Take a look at this set of information real quick. I thought this was really fascinating. So it just kind of goes to show the digital divide in some respect has always been with us, even though it's evolved. So in 1915, if an average 5-person American household is making a little over $1,500 per year after taxes, a 3-minute, you had to have it at least be a 3-minute phone call from New York to San Francisco, cost you $20.70. That's more than you'd pay per month for clothing or for housing. And so it would destroy your budget if you had to make a phone call like that. So people just weren't making phone calls like that. In many parts of our city, our county, our state, there are many, many hundreds of thousands of people, if you can believe it or not, who can't afford some of the basic services that, again, that we all, or probably most of us, take for granted. Internet service, a data plan for your smartphone, things like that. And so the question that we're trying to ask and identify and answer through Techquity is, how do we make sure that people have at least that baseline of participation? They have smartphones, they have reliable internet service, they have broadband level service, speeds that are fast enough to allow them to do the things that they need to do on a day-to-day basis. Whoops. Okay, so Techquity, it began during COVID. We were getting lots of requests, outreach about needs for computers, needs for internet connection, smartphones, and so we just started responding as quickly as we could to those stated needs. So for example, smartphones and data plans to people experiencing homelessness, computers and hotspots to kids in schools who were going home and didn't have an internet connection, or maybe enough of an internet, a strong enough broadband connection at home. That's really how it began, and continued that way for a lot of 2020. We were just getting resources out as quickly as we could. One other thing that we also started doing during that early part of 2022 was building some really important community relationships and partnerships so that we could figure out more strategic, comprehensive ways of addressing what we were discovering was a much more entrenched underlying social problem. We were responding to a lot of these situations in an ad hoc way. Just we learn of this need, we respond to it. We learn of that need, we respond to it. We find resources, we connect with donors who want to support this issue, and we just start making things happen. But then we realized that this set of problems, the digital divide, is systemic, pervasive. It's been around for a long time. It probably isn't going to change anytime soon, persisting indefinitely. The first speaker from this morning kind of identified how that could look going forward. I mean, the rate of technological change is going to happen so fast. We really have to be mindful of that question all the time. Are people able to keep up with that? And if they're not able to keep up with that, how does that affect very basic things? Not, can you post your TikTok videos or whatever? Can you find critical resources for your health? Can you get access to the education services that you need? Do you know the public transportation lines so you can get to work? And all these things that are interrelated. So we started doing our homework as an organization. I love this quote from Larry Irving. Larry Irving's the former head of the NTI, National Telecommunications and Information Administration. I wouldn't want to work for them just so I don't have to say that name all the time. But he said, we can't hotspot and laptop our way out of this. And that was, still February 2021. This is when the pandemic was going on and none of us really had any sense of an end in sight. We were waffling between, working in person, working from home, no real confidence in the direction that things were going. Another quote from Joshua Edmonds. Joshua Edmonds was the former director of digital inclusion for the city of Detroit. He's been a great example. His organization was a great example to our work. He's now in Cleveland, Ohio. He said, philanthropy is ill-equipped to bridge the digital divide. It's well-equipped to address it, and even to provide resources to bridge the digital divide, but it's just one part of the solution. And then similarly, another quote from a digital equity advocate, Gigi Sohn, all sectors have to be involved in building the solutions. So that got us thinking as an organization, what do we need to do? What kinds of relationships and strategies do we need to build that actually bring together all those sectors? United Way, as it happens, is an organization that's pretty well positioned in the community to do that. We have relationships with just about everybody. So we continued doing our homework. What is the digital divide? Again, how are we as a philanthropy, as a nonprofit, going to actually build the plan to address it? At United Way, a common tool that we use to describe our work is the metaphor of the three-legged stool: health, education, financial stability. And the point we're trying to make about digital equity and inclusion is we can't do any work in any of those areas anymore without factoring in how digital equity and inclusion or access to certain technologies is going to affect health, education, financial stability, et cetera. And so what we're focused on as a result is trying to take as comprehensive a view as possible. All of these things interrelate, and if you don't have access to broadband in your home, let's say, because you can't afford it or because there isn't service offered there, how does that affect participation for you or your family in other parts of life? Back to the social determinants of health. There's data and research now about how if you didn't have a broadband connection in your home during the pandemic, it's more likely that your health outcomes, not just related to COVID, but in general, were going to be worse. You're going to be more likely to have to visit the hospital or experience some kind of illness or disease. But even then with COVID, your experiences with COVID, being sick with it, recovering, finding opportunities to get a vaccine, you were going to have less opportunity to find those resources that could help you and keep you healthy and safe. I won't get really in the weeds with these stats, but they just do a little bit to show you the nature of the problem at a national scale. So it's not just Milwaukee County that experiences the digital divide, it's everywhere across the country. I'll point out real quickly, we're at a moment too where the federal government, the state government, they are all trying to, with Congress, they're all trying to pay as much attention to this as possible. The recent Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA, has more funding in it to address something like broadband specifically than any amount of money we've seen directed to that issue before and probably ever will again. Americans with lower incomes have lower levels of technology adoption on the left there. And then on the right, the share of Americans with lower incomes who rely on their smartphones for going online has roughly doubled since 2013. So on the right, it's basically saying the less your household makes per year in income, the more likely you are to be using your smartphone for just about everything. For some things, that is fine, you know, checking your bank account or whatever. If you're trying to write a paper for school, that's a problem. If you're trying to work remotely, again, maybe during COVID when you're restricted from going into your office, but now we're just all, that can pose some major challenges. I could not work for a full day off of my phone, and I don't have a particularly high-tech sort of job. Even though I do Techquity, it's a lot of communication, a lot of emails, a lot of talking with people. On the left there, lower levels of technology adoption. So the less, I can't read the less household income that you have, the less likely you are to adopt home broadband, desktop or laptop, the more likely you are, again, to be using your smartphone. That poses many, many kinds of challenges. This next one, despite growth, rural Americans have consistently lower levels of technology ownership than urbanites and lower broadband adoption than suburbanites. That's true. You might hear something like in the news how there is a rural broadband access problem, not just in Wisconsin, but across the country. That is true. In many areas, it's been cost prohibitive to build the physical infrastructure that's needed to deliver that broadband service into a lot of rural areas. Look at Door County, for example. I talk with the folks up there often. The topography and the geography make it extremely challenging to provide high-quality service. The flip side of that, the other side of that coin, is that in suburban and urban areas, Metro Milwaukee, you have an abundance of infrastructure. We live in an infrastructure-rich, dense environment, but accessing that infrastructure is not free. Many households, many individuals cannot afford to adopt that service. So if you're a household that's making $30,000 or less per year, affording a $60 to $80 a month home broadband subscription for probably pretty average speed, maybe 200 or 300 megabits download, that's a high cost. It's a very high cost. This is data that is taken from the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, NDIA. This particular spreadsheet was from their worst connected cities list as of 2019. They haven't updated it since the pandemic. Probably the data's been challenging to collect. But at the time, Milwaukee wasn't the quote-unquote worst connected city, but it was among the top, I think that's maybe the 15th spot. So that means we have a lot of work to do. The best data that we have available right now tells us that somewhere between 20 to 25% of residents just in the city of Milwaukee alone do not have broadband in the home, at the level of the home. So we ask questions like, why is that? In other areas where household incomes are, let's say, moderate to high, and the infrastructure exists, you see rates of broadband adoption at the household level well into the 90s, mid-90s, maybe more, maybe 99%. So if people have the option to adopt broadband, they prefer to. And in many cases, as we see, they need to. Work, school, healthcare, et cetera. And so as we're asking that question, why is adoption so low, we go back to those questions of access, affordability, infrastructure. Why are people kept out of using this resource that is now totally critical? The digital opportunity gap in Wisconsin. This comes again from the NDIA. They do great research for the whole country. Basically, this is saying that when you don't have access to certain kinds of digital technologies, whether it's broadband and or a computer, a large format device like a computer or a desktop computer, or the skills and literacy necessary to use those tools, that's going to keep you out of a lot of job openings, a lot of career opportunities, a lot of opportunities to grow, gain certifications, gain new talent. And so here it says, these individuals lacking foundational digital skills may not even begin to compete for an estimated 74% of job openings in the state. That's a huge challenge. That's a massive challenge. If we as a county, let's say, are going to grow, if we want to grow in terms of population, we need to be thinking about how are we going to upskill people with not, Python or coding or all these, much more advanced things. How are we going to make sure people know how to use their laptop, use their internet connections, stay safe on those things? That's not intuitive knowledge. So how do we prepare people with those foundational level skills and literacies so that they can start competing and participating and becoming a part of the workforce in Metro Milwaukee or Milwaukee County or Wisconsin? If everyone in the city of Milwaukee or the county, or Milwaukee County had access to affordable broadband, think of how much tech talent you don't have to bring into the state, but just is grown or developed right here in our community. Our United Way serves 4 counties, Milwaukee, Waukesha, Ozaukee, and Washington counties. And this data comes from the Census Bureau. Just gives you a sense as of the most recent years that this data was available, so about 2020, 2021, the comparison. So you'll see that households with broadband internet subscription, Milwaukee County 81%, Waukesha County 91%. All these numbers are fairly comparable. What it doesn't tell you is population density. So 91% is high. That still means there are tens of thousands of households in Waukesha County that don't have broadband to the home. Average household size is 2.5. So these numbers start adding up very, very quickly. This is an example of the data sets that we were putting together during COVID, just because there wasn't any existing data for our region that was getting this specific and in the weeds so that we knew maybe where to triage some of our resources or efforts. Some happy news, Wisconsin has a fantastic public service commission and a fantastic broadband office, WBO, Wisconsin Broadband Office, and they've been extremely proactive in paying attention to a lot of these complex issues. So we are one of the first states, along with Washington, California, to actually have a state broadband plan. This means that we're going to be more competitive for federal and, well, definitely federal funding. There's going to be a lot more state funding that becomes available for nonprofits and community-based organizations of all kinds to start addressing the digital divide. But Wisconsin is leading in that way, which is exciting. Online digital skills training, this is one way in which we're not leading, an opportunity for us to grow significantly. We, as a state, don't offer free digital skills training and resources to workers or prospective workers, an example of something that we can do better. So what then is Techquity, given the kind of background that I've given? And I'd love to have some Q&A at the end of this, so please hang on to any questions that you have for me. The vision of Techquity, to ensure the digital equity and inclusion, it's right in front of me here, my gosh, what am I doing? To ensure the digital equity and inclusion of every resident in Milwaukee, Waukesha, Ozaukee, and Washington County. So we were coming at this looking at a massive problem that we were learning about more or less from organizations and people on the ground in the community who were just living day to day, experiencing these barriers and challenges. And so the question for us became, what kind of strategy do we develop that's going to address the problem at that level? Person to person, house to house, block to block. And so we decided to focus on 4 areas: broadband, devices, skills, and advocacy. The advocacy strategy is something that our organization brings to the table in a unique way. Not every community-based organization or nonprofit does advocacy. And if you're, let's say, a telecom, like a major internet service provider, or a government agency, advocacy might not be something that you spend much time doing purely because you're focused on running your business or something like that. So we thought advocacy is something unique and distinctive that our initiative and organization can bring to this space. Broadband, we want to ensure that all members of our community have access to affordable, fast, reliable internet. The federal benchmark, does anyone know what the federal benchmark for broadband internet is? No? 25.3. 25 megabits per second download, 3 megabits per second upload. That's really, really, really slow. If you are a person working, let's say you're a single parent and you have 2 or 3 kids in your house and you're trying to work from home and your kids are trying to do schoolwork from home and you're all sharing the same internet connection, no one that day is going to be getting any work done. Probably one or more of the kids is going to have to go to the library or a friend's house or relative, whatever. That's the level of the problem that we're trying to deal with, making sure that people have access to this resource so that they can just get through days and live lives of flourishing. Devices, we want to make sure that everyone has access to the kind of device that they need to be able to live and work and grow well. Not just a smartphone with a data plan, a large format laptop or desktop, whatever it is that they need so that they can, again, just do the basics: working, learning, scheduling a telehealth appointment. Skills. All of these things, broadband, computers, smartphones, and all the other fancy tools that keep coming out, they're not intuitive. They're built to be intuitive by a quote-unquote digital native. I grew up using flip phones, and you just kind of evolve in your knowledge of that. But if you don't grow up with that kind of native mindset or people around you to help navigate you through certain things, you could really be left behind in many different ways, not just working or school, but finding access to critical resources, even just making connections with loved ones. I've heard stories in the course of Techquity's work about just trying to call people that you care about during the pandemic when you're stuck in your house. There's a huge mental health component to not being able to connect with your community or with your family. And then advocacy. We're trying to build the support, the buy-in, the community knowledge and awareness of these sets of problems, and then to build policy recommendations, advocacy opportunities so that people can actually start participating and raising awareness about how serious and pervasive these sets of problems actually are. So the impact, let me go back to that. This picture here is from a device distribution that we did last summer at the Silver Spring Neighborhood Center on the north side of Milwaukee, about 64th and Silver Spring. This computer distribution was done in partnership with a group called Digital Bridge. They're a local nonprofit that we partner with the Silver Spring Neighborhood Center, with the Housing Authority for the City of Milwaukee, and a couple other organizations who came to volunteer. What we've done with Digital Bridge, for example, is capture devices that otherwise would be recycled. They'd go maybe into a landfill, or maybe they'd be sold in a market overseas. Capturing used devices, refurbishing them for very, very low rates, which donors to United Way and to Techquity have supported. And then we can distribute those out into the community in a very, very fast fashion. So here we have an event where people pre-registered. We have your just basic contact information and name. There's no huge amount of data you have to submit for for getting one of these devices. But you show up, you get your computer, you get some information about how to set it up, how to log in, how to create your account, how to stay safe once you can actually get online with it, and then you're off. That's it. Putting the devices in the hands of people so that they can begin the process of learning and growing with it. This particular day, 300 devices distributed right there at the Silver Spring site, and then 150 additional ones distributed later from all the people who heard about this and just walked up and said, this is amazing, I have no idea, I had no idea this was going on, but I need a computer, can you please help me? 650,000, I think that's probably a pretty conservative estimate at this point. That's the amount that Techquity thus far has invested in digital equity and access work throughout our 4 counties since 2020. 2,000, that's the number of devices distributed to those without digital device access. Our goal over the next several years is to distribute 50,000. We think that, again, conservative estimate across our 4 counties is that probably about 50 to 60,000 households in that 4-county area lack just a basic large format device within the house. 28, the number of Techquity partners who've been able to provide affordable broadband access, computers, smartphones, hotspots, et cetera, as well as skills and literacy trainings to thousands of community members. Again, I think that number is probably conservative by now. And then grants received. So I mentioned a lot of attention of these issues from the federal level, from the state level, and just from other big philanthropies donors looking to address certain parts of the digital divide. This is an example or a short list of some of the grants that we've received to support this work so far, and we look forward to many more opportunities like that, like them. Within our broadband strategy, here you can see a short list of some of the projects and work that we actually have going on the ground. Believe it or not, some of the most digitally inequitable areas in the entire state of Wisconsin are about a 3-minute walk from this building. And digital inequity, just by the nature of the data that we have, is usually defined within census blocks or census tracts. That's how we understand region by region where inequities are greatest. Inequities are defined by several factors. Lack of access to household broadband, lack of access to a household large format device, things like that. So we know that on the south side of Milwaukee, there are some of the most digitally inequitable census blocks and tracts, again, in the entire state. And so we're focused on that area right now. We have a fixed wireless access project going on there. Donors have helped us actually pull fiber optic cable into a housing authority building so that all the residents of that building have access to more affordable options for basic internet. In many cases, it might even be free with something like the Affordable Connectivity Program assisting them. Low-cost options, that kind of choice and opportunity is really, really essential to making sure that broadband access is equitable across the board. Our initiative convenes the Milwaukee Broadband Partnership. This is a group of local leaders, digital equity leaders, business leaders from all sectors, healthcare, government, education, and so on, who are working together to really get at the policy level things that need to shift in order for, again, broadband affordability to happen. We're conducting a broadband feasibility study. We've selected a vendor. There's a 6-month process for that. We've actually begun that now. That will give us very granular data, like at the household level, about who has access to broadband service, and then looking at things like, is there a difference between advertised speed and actual speed? There's been a lot of research and reporting, for example, over the last year, highlighting that in certain communities, you might be advertised one speed and pay X amount for that, but then compared to a neighbor of yours several blocks away who's getting the same exact service, their speed for internet might be a lot less. So we're trying to figure out why and how those disparities persist. ACP Community Kiosk Project. We needed a very tactical, strategic way of spreading awareness about the Affordable Connectivity Program. This is a $30 a month discount that folks might be eligible to receive to actually make their broadband service affordable. So we have kiosks that are going into the lobbies and different service areas of a lot of our nonprofit partners so that folks can take about a 3 to 5 minute survey, find out if they're interested and then maybe eligible for ACP, and if they are, they get instructions on how to apply for it pushed right to their phone. And then ACP enrollment drives. We just held one at MATC downtown, and we're going to be continuing that work indefinitely. This is a nice picture from a meeting we had just last week. This was the Techquity Advisory Council and the Milwaukee Broadband Partnership all together for the first time. If you can believe it, I'm sure you can because you lived through COVID too. This group of people for over 2 years had only met virtually. Every single meeting, everything that we did, all the planning, all the work had happened virtually. So this is the first time that we could finally be together and collaborate. Devices. I mentioned already the Bridge Milwaukee program that we're supporting through Digital Bridge. We're working with organizations like Goodwill, for example, to provide hotspots and data plans for 6 months or more as folks go through job readiness programs, supporting that digital skills component. I hope it's becoming clear too, all these things interrelate. You can't just solve address broadband and hope that all the rest of it works out. You have to do broadband, and you have to do skills, and you have to do devices, and you have to advocate for better policy all at the same time. Our Techquity Digital Navigators project, we are now actively recruiting for people from any sector. Anyone who wants to volunteer and get involved in this work can raise their hand to be a digital navigator. That might mean sitting down with someone at a place like MATC to walk them through the eligibility and enrollment process for ACP. We had a wonderful guy from Baird volunteer for our enrollment drive at MATC, and he didn't know anything about ACP, learned a little bit, I think, a day or two before, showed up, and he was the first person that day to help someone enroll in the program. Digital navigators might look like people leading a skills training session. It could be stuff, basic stuff, or stuff that I consider to be basic, like, using your email, Microsoft Word, Microsoft PowerPoint, Excel, or it could be stuff that's much more advanced, going into schools, doing coding demonstrations, doing different kinds of STEAM events or activities. We're also working with Everyone On, which is a national digital skills nonprofit, to develop skills training cohorts. So groups of maybe 15 or up to 30 people who are getting free digital skills training. And then advocacy. I've talked a lot about the public policy working group, or the work of the Milwaukee Broadband Partnership. We are working on finalizing some public testimony for at least this time Joint Finance Committee that's recently been in Waukesha and doing a state tour, getting proposals for the state budget. We want to see digital equity and inclusion priorities reflected in that budget. We're having community conversations on affordable broadband. We want to hear, Nancy Hernandez, who was up here before, was making a great point about listening. A major focus of this initiative is just listening. Stopping and listening to people who have the lived experience of being on the wrong side of the digital divide, for whom broadband access in the home is a problem. We need to learn those stories, we need to start telling those stories, and building an awareness of how many people this issue actually affects. And then our digital devices and skills grants. So this is something that the donor power of United Way has really made possible. The support and the donor involvement that we've had with Techquity has been incredible, and that has allowed us to develop these grant programs so that other nonprofits can also start engaging in this work. And then other things we're working with the I Have a Dream Foundation to develop some broadband access projects in a local school. And then we're also working with University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Their executive MBA students are part of a LAMP program where they do a project, a kind of capstone project, and they're working with us to find something cool and interesting that advances broadband equity in Milwaukee. This is just a nice little display of all the different organizations and entities that we've learned from, that we've worked with, who've guided us a lot in the development of this initiative. And it's just to name a few, some of which are local, others of which are not. So then the big question, what's next? What's the future? Think back to the first gentleman who was presenting this morning. None of this work, digital equity inclusion work, if things are heading technologically where we all think they are, then none of this digital equity inclusion work is ever going to stop. We're always going to have to be asking the question of who gets to participate in this digital economy and who does not, who's in and who has been left out. And so the focus of this initiative is always asking that question of who has been left out, who is experiencing a barrier to full participation in our economy, our education system, our healthcare system, and what can we do to actually bring them to the other side of that divide and get them the access that they need so that they can participate and flourish. I think that's all I have for you this morning. Thank you very much. Maybe I can ask for questions, comments? Yeah. Basic virus software. So Digital Bridge, the organization that I've mentioned a couple times, when they go through the refurbishment process for devices that are being recycled or been donated, they have just the basic Microsoft suite of products that they'll load onto the device, which contains, again, kind of basic antivirus software, things like that. I would love it if there were more advanced options, but that, I don't know, we talk with Microsoft pretty often, maybe that's a conversation worth having. I will say the cybersecurity component of digital equity and inclusion is something that's talked about a lot less than it should be talked about. We are paying attention to that as much as we possibly can. So, for example, when you're giving out 300 computers or something like that, does everyone have the skills or have the basic know-how to keep themselves safe or to use that device in ways that aren't going to walk them into some kind of scam or something like that? At the end of the day, there's no way to provide 100% safeguard against that, but we are really actively trying to make sure that people feel comfortable and confident when they have that device so that they don't get into things that they shouldn't or wouldn't want to. All right, well, if you have any other questions, comments, come find me afterward. Thanks very much.